From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. It's Memorial Day weekend, which usually kicks off the busy season along Alabama's Gulf Coast. And just in time, the state has officially made travel to Alabama's beaches toll-free. Governor Kay Ivey on Wednesday signed a memorandum completing the state's purchase of the Foley Beach Express toll bridge, a project that was first announced in April. At a signing ceremony in Orange Beach, Ivey said those traveling to Alabama beaches can now do so without the cost of tolls. The state had been involved in a lawsuit over its ongoing plans to build an additional bridge over the canal to Orange Beach and Gulf Shores. That is now moot, and soon both bridges will be operational. Whether it's on the coast or on one of Alabama's pristine lakes or rivers, many Alabamians will be out on the water enjoying their boats this weekend. Alabama officials are urging boaters to be safe on the water. Jeff Sanders has that story.
The Memorial Day weekend is considered the unofficial start to summer. And for many Alabamians, there's no better way to celebrate than taking to the state's waterways.
During the coming Memorial Day holiday period, Marine Patrol troopers will be joined by law enforcement officers from the United States Coast Guard, Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries officers, and Marine Resources officers from the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, as well as county and municipal marine law enforcement officer units on Alabama's waterways in an effort to deter unsafe boating activity.
For state law enforcement agencies, making sure boaters are staying safe is again a top priority.
We don't want to see any deaths on the waterways this year or any year. So just a simple act of wearing a life jacket, if you happen to fall overboard, could save a life.
We ask that all boaters be mindful of other boaters, avoid passing too closely to boats in motion, boats at idle, and persons in the water. We specifically encourage the use of the designated operator concept. The sun, wind, and other weather conditions already produce an effect on boaters known as boater fatigue, and the consumption of alcohol only intensifies and compounds this effect.
During a press conference at the state capitol, law enforcement thanked members of the legislature for passing new safety and enforcement laws. In October, new regulations will be implemented at Lake Martin and Weiss Lake, including a 100-foot idle speed zone from the shoreline for wake surfing. Additionally, non-residents will be required to provide proof of completed boater safety training.
The waterways are just like the roadways. The only difference is you don't see yellow lines and you don't have red lights. But the same law and the same attention needs to be given to boating as you would right here on this road.
But the most important safety advice for boaters comes down to common sense and judgment.
A lot of people say be the fun police. We're not to stop people from having a good time. We just want people to do it in a safe manner, and we want everybody to return home.
There were 0 deaths on Alabama's waterways during the 2023 Memorial Day weekend. And with the implementation of new laws and public awareness, state law enforcement officials hope that number 0 rings true again this year. Reporting from Lake Martin, I'm Jeff Sanders for Capitol Journal.
The Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources marked Safe Boating Week with Academy Sports and Outdoors, which is once again donating loaner life jackets. 300 life jackets were donated this year, and the department will be offering them to boaters over the weekend. Governor Ivey said she planned to be on the lake herself this weekend and urged citizens to protect themselves by wearing life jackets.
I remind Alabamians to be safe as they go off our waterways with their family and friends. And what a great way to emphasize water safety by thanking Academy for that very generous donation. This is the first year that the department will launch their own safety initiative, better known as the Life Jacket Loaner Program. These very life jackets receiving today be used by our conservation and enforcement officers on duty to protect them as they work to keep everyone on the water safe. Some of these life jackets will even be used by Alabamians out enjoying the water. Folks, this weekend, I know I'll be out on the water in my pontoon boat enjoying the lake. And you better believe my dog Missy and I will be wearing our life jacket.
We reported last week on Alabama's third graders exceeding expectations on this year's reading test scores. It's good news that 91% of students are reading at or above grade level, making them eligible to be promoted to 4th grade under the Alabama Literacy Act. And for those 9% that tested below grade level, efforts are now underway to catch them up in time for the next school year. Randy Scott reports.
There's excitement around Alabama schools. Grades are in, and most Alabama students fared well on the state literacy exam, but some 4,800 third graders read below their benchmark levels. That amount is down from previous totals, and some school officials want to improve those numbers.
So with the Literacy Act that began in 2019, we actually were given some leeway on it because that's when the pandemic happened, and so it was pushed back and delayed and delayed. Well, this year, 23-24 was finally that year where third grade students would be held back or not promoted to 4th grade if they did not make a passing score on the ACAP.
Dr. Melissa Williams is the superintendent for the Macon County school system.
We did get those scores, those preliminary scores in on last Friday morning as promised. Actually, they hit the portal that night because we were watching and looking and hoping, and we had a 90% pass rate district-wide for our third grade students.
Dr. Williams adds they're focusing on students not grading well on that exam.
Those students that did not make the cut scores, of course, there are different pathways that they'll be able to take, a course of action that they'll take through the summer months to be successful, and that's our goal. We start summer school June 3rd through July 11th, and so we will have those students prepared.
As with other school systems around Alabama, Macon County is also getting ready for the summer. Well, that doesn't mean the work ends. With recent results coming from reading scores around the state, that success is something to build on, and Macon County officials want to keep that trend going.
We have significantly increased our scores from last year to this year. The students did really well on becoming sufficient, and that was the state's level of achievement, if you will.
Lisa Grandison is the curriculum specialist for Macon County schools, focusing on literacy. She says good returns, but their jobs are far from over.
Once the Literacy Act was put in place, the district moved forward in placing supports in schools. Some schools receive interventionists. Some schools that did not have resources for interventionists, the teachers were trained in intervention programs to help bridge the gaps for the children who were struggling.
In Macon County, Randy Scott, Capital Journal.
Governor Ivey this week encouraged students to keep up their reading momentum going throughout the summer with her Summer Reading Challenge. The challenge is for students from kindergarten through 8th grade and could result in the governor visiting the schools that show the most progress.
Now, as we approach the summer break, I want to remind you all that while it's time to unwind and enjoy some well-deserved relaxation, it's also time to keep our minds active and engaged. So what better way to do that than by picking up a good book? Last year, many of you joined me in my Summer Reading Challenge. I was amazed by the enthusiasm you brought to your reading adventures. Well, guess what? It's back. And I'm inviting each and every one of you to join me in my Summer Reading Challenge once again. Whether you're diving into a thrilling mystery or exploring distant lands, there's a book out there waiting for you, and I want to hear all about it. So here's the challenge. If you're a student entering grades K through 8 for the upcoming school year, I want you to write me a letter this summer. Tell me about your favorite summer reading book and why it captured your imagination. My Summer Reading Challenge begins now and ends on July 31st. So be sure to send me your letters before then. I can't wait to hear back from you and to embark on this literary adventure together throughout the summer months. Students, let's get reading.
We've reported recently on ongoing conversations about updating how Alabama calculates funding for public schools. Right now, under the Foundation program that was enacted back in the 90s, schools receive funding on a simple per-student basis. State lawmakers are now considering updating that, as other states have done, to take into account factors that make education more expensive for school districts, such as the number of special needs students or English language learners. They discussed those ideas during a special legislative hearing in the State House this week. State Senator Jay Hovey of Auburn was a part of that meeting and said it's all about ensuring Alabama is getting the most out of funding meant to provide a quality education to students.
Appreciative of our budget chairs and their diligence, in those public funds, and making sure that we, balance our expenses with our revenue. And I think as inflation or as our economy continues to evolve, over the next few months, I think I was quite pleased with the conservative nature that we've been able to continue. My involvement in the education ETF, our education budget committee, and our education policy committee is going to keep us pretty busy. We've got a couple of meetings here this week that I'm excited about looking at opportunities to continue to support our public school systems and keep trying to make our state as strong educationally as possible.
Some good news this week coming out of Alabama's prisons. The Department of Corrections reports that the number of assaults, contraband, and deaths are down statewide for the second straight quarter. According to a report showing numbers for the first quarter of this year, assaults are down almost 6% from the previous quarter and down almost 13% from the same time a year ago. Deaths are also down, as many as 20 fewer inmates dying behind bars than a year ago, and inmates being caught with weapons has declined 14% since the previous quarter and 55% from the same time a year ago. It wasn't all good news, however. Instances of sexual assault or harassment increased by 81.4% since the previous quarter. The majority of those are reported at the Tutwiler Women's Prison in Elmore County. Also from corrections this week, Alabama Daily News reports that UAB Hospital in Birmingham has stopped performing autopsies on deceased inmates. The hospital had been on contract with the Department of Corrections to perform autopsies on inmates whose deaths were deemed suspicious, but that contract has now been terminated after several allegations of organs being removed without a family's knowledge. A spokesman for the department said suspicious deaths will now be referred to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. Good news on the economic front. Alabama's housing market saw its third consecutive month of improvement in April. That's according to a new report from the Alabama Association of Realtors. The report shows home sales in April improved over March's numbers by 3.7% and over February's numbers by nearly 10%. That's welcome news and a sharp turnaround from last year when home sales shrunk by more than 30%. Alabama Realtors CEO Jeremy Walker said April was the most encouraging month he's seen this year, and the indicators point to further improvements over the summer. Turning to Washington, U.S. Senator Katie Britt made news this week with her introduction of legislation aimed to protect in vitro fertilization, or IVF, at the federal level. The IVF Protection Act, sponsored by Britt and Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, would stop states from prohibiting access to IVF treatments. Appearing on Fox News this week, Britt corrected the characterization of what happened with IVF here in Alabama and said a federal law would take politics out of the issue.
This is what brought this whole thing up. They voted to ban it. And now where is it at?
Yeah, so obviously there was judicial interpretation that caused a chill in the state, but the Alabama legislature, that has been named the most conservative legislature in the nation, quickly acted to make sure that we affirmatively protected IVF and that procedure in the state. So those clinics are back open. That's moving forward just to make sure IVF is available in every state across the nation. Ted and I want to make sure that it stays that way. We want to speak with one voice, get rid of the fear-mongering, any anxiety that parents have as they're trying to bring new life into this world. We want to take that away, and we believe this should be bipartisan.
Coming up after the break, I'll sit down with Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission Director John McMillan for an update on where we are in the long-delayed medical marijuana process. After that, Auburn University professor Rusty Adair will analyze the recent Mercedes union vote and talk about what's next on that issue. And later in the show, A+ Education Partnership President Mark Dixon will discuss the state's encouraging reading scores and what went into making that a reality. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Originally designated as a postal route in 1806, the old federal road stretched through the Creek Indian Territory of Lower Alabama. Alabama's federal road functioned as a major thoroughfare for western migration into the Old Southwest, ushering in a new era of national expansion and exploitation of Native American territory. Although much of the federal road has disappeared, portions of it remain today.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is John McMillan, Director of the Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission. Mr. McMillan, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd. Great to be back with you.
Well, it's about time for another update, right?
Yes, sir.
Where we are in the process. I know it's been a frustrating process in terms of legal challenges and fits and starts, but can you update our audience on where the process is for medical cannabis and getting those products to the market?
Be more than happy to, and again, thanks for this opportunity, because lost in litigation and other actions outside of the control of the commission and the staff has kind of camouflaged everything, you might say. And the most disappointing thing is that the patients have been lost in all of this hoorah. So anyway, yes, we are really pleased. The commission actually has done a fantastic job. We have, at this point, issued 16 licenses in different categories, cultivators, transporters, processors, lab, and the only two categories that are still delayed by a temporary restraining order are dispensaries and integrators, and that's where particularly the integrators, most of the litigation has surrounded that.
And so when you say dispensary, so the integrated is start to finish, right?
That's right. That's everybody and everything.
And so, but that includes dispensaries. But so the dispensaries, that would be like a store, a storefront?
Right, the outlet, yeah.
Okay, so until those are approved, I guess that's really kind of impossible to.
Right, that's the only way. On that retail option is the only way that the products can be sold.
I see.
But in addition to that, again, it's overshadowed by some of these external things, but we have gotten the contracts with seed to sale tracking each plant, and plants are actually being grown in Alabama right now. I hope you'll have an opportunity to visit one of these cultivators and see what's going on. It's some really, this is a highly regulated, very intensive scientific effort with high-tech lighting and security systems and all of those things that are involved in the regulating of this whole program. That's what we've been focused on, and we've got the seed to sale tracking, we've got the patient registry, working with the Medical Association, Board of Medical Examiners, who's responsible for certifying physicians, all of those kind of things, and tracking the plant. When the plants are about 8 inches high, they get it labeled with a number and a tag, and that stays with it till it's sold at the dispensary. Anything to do with that particular single plant that goes into the process, including the parts of it that are disposed of. So it's a highly technologically oriented program, safe and secure, well regulated, high quality products, and I think when we get there, the folks in Alabama are going to really be surprised at really what a high level this whole program produces.
Well, I certainly do want to go and visit one of these facilities. We'd love to take our cameras and kind of bring our viewers into because it's been kind of shrouded, if you will, and the controversy kind of overwhelms everything. Well, I know you're not the judge, and I know you don't control what the judges are going to do, but the one question that everybody has is, when can we expect these products to come to market? I know maybe that's difficult to answer because of the lawsuits, but Can you give any kind of indication of when patients can expect to at least have these available?
Yeah, and Todd, that is far and away the number one question we get on our website and has been for many months. And I'm sorry to say, as you stated, I just don't know. I'm continue to be hopeful. I've lost a lot of optimism. I tend to be hopeful that within a matter of months we'll have some resolution in the courts and be able to go ahead and stand up the dispensaries and integrators and let them join the other licensees that have already been issued and get this program going. It has a lot to offer.
Well, and there's been like multiple rounds of lawsuits too, right? This is not just one single lawsuit. There have been multiple challenges. Do you expect, even if this one gets resolved, that they won't stop? They'll just keep having lawsuits to delay it? Is there any fear about that?
Well, there's certainly a possibility, and the only thing we can do is sort of judge by what's happening in the other states, particularly southern states. And there has continued to be litigation, especially in Florida, like 8 or 9 years now. I think maybe their recent legislative session, they finally got their last litigation taken care of in the legislature. So hopefully we'll be able to at least follow that type pattern, and that is get the program up and going, which Florida did a number of years ago, but continue to deal with lawsuits where they come up.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of the legislature, we just had a session conclude a couple weeks ago, and you heard a lot of frustration from lawmakers on this issue, considering that the law was passed 3 years ago. Their frustration over the fact that, patients don't have access yet, frustrations over the lawsuits, but also some of them expressing frustration about inconsistencies from the commission and over different rule procedure following and things like that. A couple of bills were proposed but ultimately not passed, so there's not been a legislative fix, so to speak. But how do you respond to, because I'm sure they talk to you too, how do you respond to those frustrations that we heard so much during the legislative session?
Well, nobody's more frustrated than our commission and our staff, and certainly I am, because frankly, in my opinion, most of these lawsuits are frivolous, but they have been used as a delaying tactic. I hope to some extent and believe that a lot of the litigation came from the fact that, well, let's just block everything. Let's just keep the commission from being able to do anything. Let's just shut this program down through the courts and try to get something settled in the legislature. And that was
so. If I didn't win my license, then I'm going to just sue and stop the whole thing.
Right. Just stop anything from happening until I try to get something through the legislature. That didn't happen. So, and again, might be back to my hopeful thinking that maybe some of that will diminish now that the legislature chose not to get involved into any changes in the program.
Does there need to be some kind of legislative fix? Could you see that being helpful in some way, or could it be harmful in terms of just leading to more lawsuits because the law changed?
Well, I think it appeared to me that the main thing legislature was not willing to do was expand the number of licenses. I think that was apparently that was just the main thing that froze the legislative process after a couple of bills were introduced. The legislature did pass the bill to shift the cultivating, licensing and permitting and inspections and everything from the Department of Agriculture to the commission, and that's fine with us. I think there's something to be said for one agency having that part of the responsibility, as well as because it fits right in so closely with it. It's the beginning of everything that we do in the other licenses as well. So we're good with that. And I don't know. I think that I think now it's pretty obvious that the legislature is not going to choose to intervene even in later sessions. So our focus now is going to be on dealing with the litigation in the courts and hopefully get this program stood up. And again, responding to the patient needs and getting away from what the lawyers and lobbyists are interested in.
Well, a lot to watch in terms of those court cases moving forward. But you mentioned the patients again, and I do think that's important to remind folks why this whole thing exists in the first place.
That's right.
Can you remind us about what types of illnesses and conditions that medical marijuana can help treat outside of the sort of traditional, pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, let me say, anybody that's interested in seeing that whole list of about 15 particular medical needs that are eligible to be addressed by the doctor recommendations is on our website at amcc.alabama.gov, and there's lots of other information, the legislation we've talked about before, the legislation's on there, rules and regulations, all of those kind of things. But let me tell you, in response to that question, nationally, the research shows that about 82% of the recommendations are for chronic pain. That seems to be one of the main things. But there are a number of other things. PTSD is one of the really main things. Veterans Administration is doing a lot of research on that. That's an important thing, certainly for a lot of folks in Alabama, because Alabama is heavily a military state and has been with active duty folks. Those type things, anything to do with there's a great opportunity from what I see with research to displace a lot of the opioids with the pain addressing ability of the cannabis. So a lot of research to be done. I don't know whether you want to get into it today or not, but the federal declassification or change in classification is going to be a big issue that plays into all of this at some point.
Right. Well, no, it's important, and we'll list the website and encourage folks to go and if they're curious about that. Well, look, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming for another update, and hopefully next time it'll be towards the end or maybe at the end, and we'll be celebrating the actual products going to market.
I look forward to coming in here and having a display of the packaged products that we're going to have available in dispensaries, how the level of work we are doing to be sure that those child-proof packaging and all of those kind of things. So, yeah, we still got a long way to go, but the commission has done a lot of good, solid work, and we're ready for the program and for the patients to be served by it.
Yes, sir. We'll keep them in the package.
Fantastic.
Thanks again. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Birmingham's Rickwood Field is the nation's oldest operating ballpark and served as the home field of the Birmingham Barons, Birmingham A's, and the Birmingham Black Barons for decades. The Birmingham Barons inaugurated the new field on August 18, 1910 by defeating the Montgomery Climbers. The Black Barons played there between 1924 and 1950. Rickwood hosted Birmingham's minor league teams for several seasons through 1987. From 1967 to 1975, the Barons were owned by Ensley native Charlie O. Finley and were part of the Kansas City and later Oakland A's organization. More than 100 members of the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame have played at the field, including Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Satchel Paige, and Willie Mays. Today, the historic field is managed by Friends of Rickwood and hosts local amateur and college teams. The Birmingham Barons still play a ceremonial throwback game at the ballpark every year, the Rickwood Classic, which celebrates Barons teams of the past and this historic field.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is Rusty Adair, a professor at the Auburn University Harbert College of Business. Rusty, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Well,
we're talking about this union issue, right? The vote last week at Mercedes there in Tuscaloosa surprised a lot of people. The union did not prevail. The workers rejected the United Auto Workers. You teach business at Auburn, including labor, issues. You had a long career in, human resources and things like that. What were your takeaways as someone who knows a lot about this subject?
Yeah. Well, it was significant there was a lot of attention given to the vote. And you're right, there were a lot of people that predicted that the union would win here, which would have been really a major event in the state. I wasn't quite as sure as other people were that the union would win, but the UAW was riding a wave of momentum. They had just had the strike in Detroit against the Big Three. That resulted in a fairly lucrative labor agreement for the employees, significant wage increases, 25 to 30%, and restoration of cost of living adjustment and some other things. And Shawn Fain, the president of the UAW, said after that agreement that they were going to spend the next 5 years organizing the non-union automakers, and they were going to focus on the South. So this is a strategic move on their part. And then, of course, they went to Chattanooga and they organized the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga. And so they were riding a lot of momentum coming into this vote. But there were a couple of things that were different about the Volkswagen vote and the Mercedes vote. Okay. Probably the most significant one was that the Volkswagen vote did not really have a corporate campaign. The company didn't really campaign against the union. There were a lot of things that go into that. The Works Council in Germany, I think, got involved and talked to the corporation. So they were fairly neutral. So the only voice the employees were hearing was the union's voice. That was not the case with the Mercedes. With the Mercedes vote, the company was very aggressive, launched a counter campaign, a lot of conversation about why a union would not be appropriate in this case, countered some of the arguments that the union was making, and of course made a major leadership change along the way.
Right, that was significant.
It was, and so that was really, I think it was really kind of the difference in the two. The other notable thing about the Mercedes vote was the turnout. I think 93% of employees voted in the election.
That seems high. Is that?
It's very high.
Okay.
It's very high. What you worry about with a union election is you pretty much know you're going to get the employees who are passionately in favor of a union to come out and vote. This is their moment to make this happen. What happens frequently is other employees get tired of the conversation and then don't go vote. And all you need is a simple majority, 50% plus one of the voting of who votes, not the overall employee population. And so it's not unusual to get a union into a company based on just a small number of votes. And so I think that the turnout was an indicator of how successful the company campaign was in this case.
Interesting. Well, yeah, the people in this building, the politicians, we understand voter apathy.
Absolutely.
Pretty well. Well, can you kind of take us inside the process? Because, I mean, goodness, this went on for weeks, really months. But I don't know a lot about how that works. Can you take our viewers into what goes into how a vote is conducted? I know the National Labor Relations Board is involved. How do the mechanics work?
Yeah, at a high level, and there are a lot of variables that could affect this, but at a high level, it begins with the union initiates some sort of a campaign. So they choose a target, and there's a lot of work they do behind the scenes, in many cases before the company is even aware that they're there. They're talking to employees, understanding the issues, and their goal is to get the majority of employees to sign a card that says they have an interest in a union. That's really the trigger for the National Labor Relations Board. Legally, they need 30% of employees to sign cards, but most unions don't stop at 30% because they need to feel like they have a sufficient amount of interest to withstand an election. And so usually they aim for 60, 70, 80%. I don't know what the number was here. But once they get the card signed, that's really the trigger where they can then go to the National Labor Relations Board, which is the entity that oversees union activity and sets union rules, and petition for an election. And then there's a period of time, the National Labor Relations Board will make sure that they have significant interest. They will make sure that what's called is the bargaining unit, who would be eligible to be in the union and who's not eligible by virtue of their jobs. So what does that bargaining unit look like? And then they oversee the election. And it's really when these cards are presented, when the company becomes aware in many cases that there's actually a campaign going on. And then they have a short period of time, 60 to 90 days, to wage their own campaign to really give their side of the story, because the employees have been hearing the union side, and then the NLRB oversees the election, and it's a secret ballot election where employees either vote yes or no. But as we said a few minutes ago, the key there is how many people vote, and at the end of that vote, then there's a simple majority wins the election or loses the election. And then that determines the outcome. Now, what's going on with Mercedes and what happens on the back end of a lot of these is Mercedes has filed a handful of unfair labor practice charges against Mercedes that the NLRB is considering. And so there's always the option that there's a chance that the NLRB may have a hearing on these unfair labor practice charges, and then they could do a couple of things. They could order another election. This board under a Democrat administration is very union friendly. They have actually issued bargaining orders where even though the union was unsuccessful in the election, the NLRB can still basically order the company to bargain. That would be would feel like that's probably a bridge too far, but there is some precedent for that. But short of that, once the election is over, the NLRB recognizes the results, and then there's a 12-month period before the union can come back, which I expect they probably will do in this case.
Well, I'm curious about this. Before you came to Auburn, you had a long career in human resources, specifically with International Paper, which is a unionized workplace, right? Those paper mills are unionized. What's the difference? I mean, we hear a lot about union versus non-union. What's the difference in terms of the work environment and how things go in those facilities?
Yeah, it's a great question. So International Paper has 3 paper mills in the state. All 3 of those paper mills are represented by the United Steelworkers Union. And the primary difference, the short answer to the question is you have a third party that you have to work through when you deal with your employees. And so any change you want to make, a policy change, a rule change that affects working conditions, has to be bargained with the union. Anytime you have an accountability situation, a discipline situation, the union represents the employee. And so the reason that companies are so opposed to unionization is it slows down the decision-making process. It makes it more difficult to do business because you have to go through a third party. That doesn't mean you can't be successful. We were very successful. We had a good relationship with the union. We worked well with the union, and we're able to work any problems we had, issues we had. We're able to work through those. But in a nutshell, it slows down your ability to make decisions and make changes. And the fact that you have to bargain wages and you bargain benefits also has an impact on wage levels in those cases.
But it's not always acrimonious.
No, it doesn't have to be. In fact, when I talk to my students about how do you manage in a union environment, what I emphasize is that your focus should be on problem solving, that you work with this third party to solve the problems that come up. And if it's done the right way, if each side treats the other with respect and professionalism, then there's no reason it has to be acrimonious. Now, both sides have to subscribe to that same theory, and there are companies that have more of a contentious view of the union. There are unions that have a contentious view of the company, and so that's when it can get kind of ugly.
Well, what's next? I mean, we keep hearing about Hyundai maybe next, because that certainly is a target of the UAW.
Right.
But considering this big result out of Tuscaloosa, do you think that may even impact the workers' opinions of the unionization effort here in Montgomery?
I think it could. I think there are a couple of things with the Hyundai situation that are important. The first one is, it feels like to me, and I'm not close enough to know exactly what's going on, but it feels like to me the union is still working to get the support they need to move on to the next step. Now, maybe they were just waiting on the Mercedes vote and they have the signatures they need, but I think in February they had the 30% threshold, but they haven't moved on to petitioning for an election yet. So I don't know what their internal support feels like. I did believe that if the Mercedes vote went the other way, if the union won the vote, I felt like that would probably have an impact on the Hyundai election, that it could give the union even more momentum, and the Hyundai employees could look around and go, well, maybe this is something that we're missing out on. Since the vote did not go that way, I think they're going to miss that boost that they might have gotten out of a successful vote. The other thing that's different is, Hyundai is a Korean-owned company versus a European-owned company, and you don't have the Works Council and some of the stuff that's involved in Europe that supports the unions like you do in Mercedes and Volkswagen. And so I don't think that the company is going to feel a lot of pressure outside of what happens here in Montgomery to go one way or another. So I expect them to launch an aggressive company campaign. And if I had to predict, then I think it's a tough road for the union to organize Hyundai. The UAW has said on the heels of the Mercedes vote that they have to go back and relook their strategy, think about what did they do that they should have done differently, what issues did they need to focus on. And so I'm not even convinced that the Hyundai campaign will get to a vote at this point. I think it'll be interesting to see how much internal support they have, and then do they choose to push on for an election, or do they pull back and regroup a little bit? Because again, if you go to an election and you lose, you have a 12-month period before you can come back and try again. And does the UAW really want, with this strategic focus on the South, do they want to lose 2 elections in the state this close together? I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'd be easier to answer if I knew how many cards they were holding, which I don't know. But that would be the next domino to fall, is whatever happens with Hyundai in this state would have I think a significant impact on where they go from here.
Yeah, vote counting also something that people in this building are very accustomed to.
Exactly.
Well, look, thank you so much for your expertise and for your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Always good to have old home folks from Prattville.
That's right. Thanks, Todd.
Here on Capital Journal. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is Mark Dixon, president of A+ Education Partnership. Mark, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been a big week for education, big couple of weeks for education. It's why I wanted to have you on the show. But first, before we get into it, can you remind our audience about A+ and its role in the education community?
Sure. So at A+, we advocate for great schools for every child, regardless of circumstances. So we work with state leaders to advise on policy and investments that are going to make a difference for students. That's our goal every day. But we also work directly in schools. We have our A+ College Ready program and our A+ Best Practices Center that provide professional development to teachers directly in the classroom. And then we also have our A+ Student Voices team that actually trains and works with students to help them understand the need for, to help them be a voice for themselves and to improve their education. We also have our Every Child Alabama Coalition that is a grassroots organization working for great schools for every child as well.
I remember seeing pictures of your student group in Washington and here in the State House maybe advocating on their behalf. That's pretty cool to be able to meet their leaders like that.
It's really exciting, and they are actually headed back to Washington, D.C. To meet with our federal delegation next week. So we're very excited to see them and to have the students together. It's really exciting.
Yeah, that's a cool opportunity. All right, let's talk about reading.
Yes.
It was this time last week that these reading scores came out. Highly anticipated. Because this is the year the Literacy Act goes into the accountability provisions go into effect. So everybody's wondering what's going to happen with these reading scores. I think it's fair to say we exceeded expectations. The third graders exceeded expectations. 91% are at or above grade level. Still some work to do, obviously, but it was really good news. You've been tracking this from the very beginning of the Literacy Act. What was your reaction, and what should we really take away from this?
We were very excited to see this progress and very proud of our teachers, very proud of all the folks statewide that have been working to implement the Literacy Act effectively. If you think about the numbers, I mean, only 9% of students, while that's still 4,800 students is important and we've got to provide them support. When that number was 17%, you know, so almost 10,000 students a year ago and higher the year before, we're trending in the right direction. And we think about state policy, that is real progress, regardless of how you measure it. And so the more students that we're providing that foundational skill of reading to and making sure that when they go on to fourth grade, they are ready to learn, that's what we want to see, and we saw real progress on that this year.
Well, I want to go back to 2019 when that Literacy Act was passed. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think it was 5 years ago. And then, you know, COVID in between and everything. But take me back, because I know you were very involved in the crafting of that policy on the advocacy side. What did it take? Take me behind the scenes and what it took to actually make that happen from a policy standpoint.
So if we go back even a little further, Alabama previously with our Alabama Reading Initiative had actually been a national model for improving reading in the country. And had been, so we actually had seen funding for the Alabama Reading increase between 2000 and 2011 by significant amounts. And we actually saw students, we were one of the last in the nation, and then we met the national average in fourth grade reading. So we were making significant progress up until that time due to a variety of different factors and just kind of a lack of emphasis, lack of focus. We fell back down over the course by 2019 to 49th in the nation. And so the governor, legislators, other folks were very frustrated with where we were. And so there was a real effort to say, what do we need to make sure that we reinvest in it? How do we lay down the gauntlet? What can we learn from other states? Florida in the past had passed a version of our literacy law several years ago. And Mississippi actually more recently had implemented something similar to our Literacy Act, and they had met the national average in reading and actually continue to climb to this day. So there was a lot of folks that wanted to learn from that Mississippi miracle and to put that into place and to say, all right, how do we make sure that we lay down all in a comprehensive plan what students need? That includes training for our teachers in the science of reading. That includes assessments to identify early where we have struggling readers and to make sure that we understand where we have challenges. Interventions for those students so we can make sure they catch them up, because all of this begins really in pre-K, but in kindergarten right away, identifying and supporting students along the way. The high quality instructional materials are the core reading programs that really are aligned to the science of reading, because at the end of the day, what the Literacy Act about is it's not retention, it's about making sure that kids are ready to move on to the fourth grade. Because what we know from an evidence-based standpoint is that when kids move from third grade to fourth grade, they move from learning to read to reading to learn. And in the past, we had continued to pass students up that did not have that skill set. They fall further and further behind, and the data shows us that they have very little chance of graduating. So it is incumbent upon us to get this right in the beginning.
Interesting. And I think it's really important that you point out it's not about retention, but the retention portion of the law is important. And that's really what got discussed more than anything else since the Literacy Act got passed. It was delayed a couple of times because of the COVID thing, but it's happening this year. And I was talking with Dr. Mackey last week, and he emphasized, look, just because you get a letter that your child is not at grade level yet, doesn't mean they're automatically going to be held back. There are, like you said, interventions, there are pathways, there are efforts underway over the summer to try to get students ready for fourth grade. Can you kind of talk about why that was so important in that law?
It's critical, and one of the key elements of the law is parental notification and making sure that we're communicating the challenges that our students have with their parents. And so most of the folks that are getting a letter have already known there has been some challenge ongoing.
Okay.
And so this is just a culmination of that. So they have the ability to go to summer reading camps, which have been very successful in our state. And then once they go to that summer reading camp, they can take another assessment. And if they pass that assessment, they can move on to fourth grade. They can also look at a student reading portfolio where we take the 10 minimum standards that they need to meet, and if they check all those boxes, they can also move on. There are also some good cause exemptions where we look at students where they're early in their English language learner career, or they may have an IEP that is specific to their needs that they may move on in addition to that. So there are a variety of different pathways. This is not just based on one test. But I will say, I think where the cut score is set on our test right now really shows that if they are not meeting these requirements, then we really don't need them. It's better for the student.
Right.
That's what's critical, is to give them that additional year of time until they have that foundation in reading so that they can be successful. That's the goal here.
Well, because you mentioned the social promotion, right? Like, well, Johnny can't read, but we want him to be on the same grade as everybody, all of his friends and everything. But that does no service to the child.
Not at all.
Yeah. All right. So we're all feeling good about this news. It's good. We need to mark and recognize good news stories. But I want to kind of also take it this way. Passage of the Literacy Act in 2019. It's now been 5 years, and so we're seeing the fruits of that finally. Is that a lesson maybe for other policy areas related to education? I know the Numeracy Act has also passed, but there's always going to be efforts to improve education in Alabama. Is this maybe a lesson and a model to say, okay, if we do the hard things, if we pass the right policies and make the right investments, we can see success?
I couldn't agree more. And I think the way, in terms of lessons learned, I would say, one, it starts with leadership. We've had very strong leadership from Governor Ivey on this, from our state superintendent, from the state board, and from our legislators who really crafted this legislation and led the charge with Representative Collins and Senator Orr to really craft that legislation and move it forward. And that's huge. But it also takes commitment, because the easiest part, frankly, is passing a law. We want to have it's kind of a three-parter. We want to have strong policies that are evidence-based. That's number one, whether it's policy that the state board passes or policies that the legislature passes into law. So that's your starting point. That's where you get the Alabama Literacy Act. But then you've got to invest. This year, we're about $100 million going to implement the Literacy Act, and that will continue on an annual basis to continue funding and supporting that work. So that's critical as well. And finally, it's implementation, strong implementation to make sure that what is required in the law and that best practice is pushed down into schools, working with teachers, training teachers and administrators every day, and providing them the resources and the tools that they need. And that's where the Alabama Reading Initiative has been so critical. Bonnie Short and her team have done a phenomenal job.
Well, this time we won't take our foot off the gas maybe in seeing that through. Switching gears real quick while I have you. The first meeting happened this week regarding this study to change the way Alabama actually funds its schools, the funding model, so to speak, the foundation as it's known, kind of a remnant from the 90s. They're talking about updating that. You were at the meeting. Talk about how that conversation went and why this is really necessary.
We're really excited to see the legislature studying this issue, and I think that's what they are doing. They're taking their time trying to understand what are the challenges with our current formula and what can we learn from other states about best practice. Today we have what's called a resource-based formula. So essentially we say you have this many kids, you get this many teachers, this many textbooks, et cetera.
It's a head count.
Exactly. And if you think about what most other states, 41 other states in the country, including our neighbors, are using is what's called a student-based funding formula, student-weighted funding formula. That says, okay, here's the base amount that it takes to fund an education, and here we're going to add additional funding on top where we have additional costs. So students that are economically disadvantaged, special education students are extremely expensive because they have needs that need to be met. English language learners that don't currently understand the language and are having to learn English while they're learning, and then they move on into the classroom. So there's a lot of other models that we can look at in other states that have been successful in this area. Tennessee actually recently just passed a new funding formula there, and most recently this session actually Mississippi is moving to more of that student-based funding formula. The goal here is to focus less on the numbers and more on the students, and I think that's the goal of what are their needs and how do we make sure that we're meeting them. Interesting.
It's interesting to see the southeastern states all kind of competing with each other when it comes to teacher salaries, when it comes to these policies. I mean, it kind of sounds like a healthy competition in many ways. So anyway, something to watch over the next year leading up to the next legislative session. Mark, we're out of time, but thanks again for coming on the show.
Always, thank you.
We'll be right back.
Born Henry Louis Aaron on February 5, 1934 in Mobile, baseball icon Hank Aaron first honed his baseball skills while growing up in Alabama. He is best known for breaking Babe Ruth's record of 714 home runs, ultimately hitting 755, a record that stood from 1974 to 2007. During his career, Aaron was a member of the Milwaukee and then Atlanta Braves for 21 seasons and made the National League All-Star team every year from 1955 to 1974. He won 3 Gold Glove Awards for outfield, and his lifetime records for most runs batted in and most extra base hits still stand. Aaron was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1982 with 97.8% of the votes cast. In 2002, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.